Hi, David. Thank you very much for your time and openness. And it's an honor for me to speak with you today and ask you some questions from our audience in Ukraine. I collected several questions from them, and I just want to ask you. I will read it just to deliver their full question and their full meaning. But 21st century has brought us a lot of upheavals, crises, pandemics, and right now we're experiencing a large-scale war, Russian invasion in Ukraine, and it has brought us a lot of but feelings of stress, anxiety, ambiguity, uncertainty, and in Ukraine we started a volunteer GTD marathon. We deliver webinars, free webinars, and with some practical tips how to use this methodology during these challenging times. And I would like to ask you, a lot of people in Ukraine right now, their lives is falling apart, and it divided into two different parts, before the war and after the war. And what would you recommend? How can we start a new life? Where should we start from?
Well, Slava, it's mutually fine and fun to be meeting with you. You know, you're such a great champion of the GTD methodology and have done such great work in the Ukraine. And my heart goes out to all of you. Boy, I can't imagine what it's like, especially if you have family, friends, and you're connected, and then suddenly having that world explode or potentially explode. So I can't say that I have any tips to make any of that easier. All the tips or GTD are about how to make sure you stay in the driver's seat of what you're doing. Now, in a situation like that, oftentimes your horizon has to come very short, called how do we live today, this afternoon? Understood. So you don't need to think about the bigger picture stuff until or unless the situation is such that, as you have, you said, well, wait a minute, let's think about a bigger game here for us, given what's gone on and that our world has been disturbed. Now what is our desired outcome? And that could simply be security or safety for my family. It could simply be survive. It could simply be, wow, here's an opportunity to change my whole life and my whole lifestyle, given that the status quo has been so disrupted. So I think that's a very unique and individual decision that people have to make. But it is sort of the GTD process to not play victim and complain, and understood there's enough understanding from my side about why one would feel victimized by the Russians or by the invasion, and say this is not fun. I got it. But the real key and the high performance game here would be, okay, what's the positive outcome that I could focus on? And that could, as I said, simply be short term. Okay, how do I get to safety? How do I manage whatever the unknowns are that I'm dealing with right now? And then of course, oftentimes the next action is obvious, run out of the building, or whatever, that you need to do. At some point, you need to sit back and have a little bit of reflective time. I know that might be quick, or it might be while you're on the run, to say, okay, now how do I need to point myself? What do I need to do? What are the next steps, that I need to take? So again, GTD doesn't make life fun or easy. It just means the process just puts you more in the driver's seat. And oftentimes, in retrospect, I know that might be hard to see right now for a lot of people in the Ukraine, but in retrospect, people may say, wow, that allowed me, or that was a significant event in my life that allowed me to make some pretty major changes that I kind of wanted to make anyway. So whether that's true or not, but again, God bless, all of you dealing with that crisis right now.
And as I know, and I was in the same situation, a lot of people stuck in the news, and they just stuck in the past and in a victim mode. You told about it, but what should we do to switch, maybe to make a first step to switch from this victim mode? How can we unwind this past thoughts?
Well, it may make no sense rationally, but uh, you know, when in doubt, laugh. I know that's a strange way to look at it, but sometimes we just need to say, okay, it's fine to get crazy right now because it's a crazy situation. But sometimes being crazy in a crazy situation is the most sane thing to do, if that makes sense. I know that sounds paradoxical, but sometimes we just need to say, okay, let me make it up, and then make that happen. But what you make up is going to be very individual, again, to each person and their situation.
How can we return our sense of control and sense of perspective now? Because a lot of the future is unpredictable. We are in stress, and a lot of people lose this feeling.
Yeah, well, a big key for any situation, especially those that disturb us, in my 40 years of consulting in teams with individuals and coaching and so forth, sometimes when it's like I scratch my head, I don't know what to tell them. They don't know what to do. I say, let's go back to what's the current reality. And so getting a sense of what the current reality is, how much money do you have, what's actually going on, what do you know that's true, and not, oh, I hope that's true, or I think that's true, or here's my opinion about it, but what actually is true in any situation. And that works for a team, it works for individuals, works for anybody. And oftentimes, to your point, a lot of people stuck in the past, a lot of people are conditioned by what their past has been. And, oh, everybody's leaving. Who's leaving? Well, Susan said she was going to go. Well, most people generalize and exaggerate their situation. Now, again, understandably, in a situation like Ukraine is going through right now, that might be a little hard to stomach as an idea. But the truth is, I need to go, here's what's true, here's how much food we have, here's what I hear from the news that I trust, if there is any news you trust, and therefore, what do we need to do? So I think you need to put your feet on the ground and, again, get in the driver's seat from where you are. Because even if you have some sort of a goal, if you don't know where you are, you don't know whether to go left or right to get to that goal. So the first thing is to have here's what's true right now. And, again, this just pops to me to occur. I've had, 50 years of being involved with a lot of inner work and meditative work. And sometimes I just need to trust, what does the inner voice tell me? And so just being able to stop for a minute, you don't need long, stop for a minute and say, okay, what does the higher part of me think I should do right now? And you may or may not like that answer. Sometimes it may be something like, oh, that's out of my comfort zone. That's not something I could do. And yet it may be the right direction for you. So, I'd say listen to the inner voice. And that also could be your current reality. What's true right now in terms of what's going on inside of me, how I'm feeling right now. What you don't want to do is deny anxiety or stress or depression or fear. You need to acknowledge you have those. You just don't want to keep recycling those if that's not where you want to be.
And, a lot of people in Ukraine right now even don't have ability to think about the future and don't have ability to calm down. And a lot of my friends and a lot of people in Ukraine are playing different roles now, as a volunteer, as a professional, as a logistic buyer or family member. And what do you think? How can we treat it? Do we need to try to manage it? Whether we try to manage it, whether we try to build a system here.
Well, it's pretty much what I've said before. Again, you need to get in the driver's seat of where you are. So you make some choices about short term. What am I doing? Am I a volunteer now? Am I just trying to save my family now? Am I, again, that's the current reality situation. And your choices, again, are probably listen to, what the voices, and from what I hear and what I read that I trust, a lot of Ukrainians are stepping up to the plate to say, no, we are going to fight back. We are going to push back on what's been pushing at us. And, boy, I acknowledge that. And that probably came from some sort of an inner voice or some sort of an inner feeling that that's what we need to do right now. And so the whole country, I think, has kind of moved itself up the food chain in terms of how it thinks about itself as a country. And certainly, in the old fantasy stories, the invasion from the Martians or from somebody else gets the whole world to sort of line up together. And I know after 9/11 happened, and I was right there in the U.S. on Wall Street when that happened, and of course the U.S. and the whole Western world sort of came together in saying, "Wow, this is not a good thing, and how can we work together?" And of course, as things settled out, then all the differences show up, in terms of one or the other. But the unification, both from the West and the support that the West has given the Ukrainians, given this, I think has made a big difference in the world. So, I understand it might feel like the sacrifice of the country for the good of the of the EU and NATO and just the Western sense of civilization. It could be a really catalytic event. But again, your ability to be able to see it that way and to feel the potential goodness about that could be very challenging these days.
In the peaceful world, we need a tool to structure our thoughts, to be more productive, to feel less stress. But what's your thoughts about your methodology in such difficult times? Do you see any differences in applying these principles in this context, like work?
Well,
Do we need it now
yeah,
more than ever?
as I say, it's in the challenging times that GTD shows up. That's when, a lot of people let themselves fall off the wagon when they're stressed or when they have a thing, and they say, "No, I've lost my system. I've lost my systematic approach." Whereas the more mature you are with this methodology, the more when these things happen, you say, "Okay, I need to sit down and say, what's current reality? What's in my in basket?" Psychologically, otherwise, and actually apply the GTD methodology in a much more stringent way, in a much more rigid and detailed way than when things are easy.
And do you have any recommendation for our experienced users? Do they need to can they fix or improve something in methodology or make some changes in behavior now?
Well, in peaceful times, oftentimes you say, well, the system has gotten out of date. It doesn't match the changes that I've gone through. See, the system should be a moving object. The system should match what you're doing, not be some sort of static thing that you then trust, and then it gets out of date, or you start not to trust it, or you don't like it. It's like too much work, because that's not who I am right now. Because as things change, even your organization, your filing system, wherever that is, probably needs to change. At least once a year you ought to go through it and go, "Oh, God, I thought that was interesting a year ago, and now it's not at all." Toss. And so even being organized is an organic, holistic, ongoing process. You never stop. Come on, I'm an old man. I'm 76. I don't think I'll stop rethinking, reorganizing my life based upon the changes that go through. I mean, the changes are not happening quite as fast as when I was your age or when I was 26, but I still need to keep it up to date. If I don't, it all sucks back up into here, which is a crappy place to try to keep track of your life and to manage your life from. You need the external brain, but the external brain has got to be better than your mind, otherwise you don't trust it. And so building an external system or externally managed systematic approach is critical to have your brain be available for what it's really good for, which is making good, intuitive, strategic decisions and being creative. If it's distracted by things that it's not handling well in the external world, then you're taking up cognitive real estate that's not available for the stuff that your system can't do, which is make creative decisions or make strategic decisions. That's what's uniquely human. And that's not what's in the system. What the system does is give you support for making creative decisions and strategic decisions. Today's Mother's Day, right? Well, if you have a sense of what your mother likes and what her favorite color is and what presents you've given to her before or whatever, then that's going to make it easier for you to make a decision about what to do for mom today. If you had the freedom to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. And how can we adjust the system for depending on individual straightness and uniqueness? How can we adjust, or should we adjust?
Well, it should always be in constant adjustment, but you can't do that every hour, every day. I'm sorry, it comes back, it's called the weekly review, or something like that, where every once in a while you need to bring up the rear guard and get yourself current. Because, come on, you and I both have probably had things show up in the last few days that we haven't had a chance yet to identify that that's a project, there's an outcome I need, or what the next action is. You just know you have something. But when are you going to make that decision, and how are you going to make that decision? And that just requires some step back and reflection time. And that might have to be very fast. I mean, some teams need to be meeting 3 times a day just to stay current with the changes in the competition and the technology change or whatever. And sometimes you only need to do that once a month. So it really depends on how often do you need to make sure you get current, and what do you need to look at in order to get current with all of that. And it may just be as simple as checking in with your family. How does everybody feel? That's a current reality that you probably need to take into consideration, as you're making decisions about all this stuff.
There are not so many knowledge about GTD in Ukraine as I see from my perspective now, but a lot of people need it, but maybe without, they don't know they need it. But right now a lot of people is doing volunteer work. And do you have any simple advices? How can they use this approach during this volunteer work now?
Well, as we've seen, and again, my co-author and I, Ed Lamont, and I are writing a book and crafting a book right now about GTD and teams. But teams is such a broad thing. It's kind of like anybody you intersect with, your family, your volunteer group, or whatever. And any one person on that team or in that group can make sure that the group sort of thinks at the appropriate level. So if you're in a volunteer group, it's, again, all the good GTD questions. Okay, guys, what is our desired outcome right now? And that might be for the next hour or for the next day or for the next week. I don't know. Depends on the situation that you're in. But being able to frame that conversation, gee, guys, what are we trying to do together right now? Because you come together as a team because you have a mutual purpose. So making sure you understand what that purpose is and what are our guiding principles. I know you may not feel like you have time to go through those kind of off-site exercises, that some teams in a more peaceful situation, might do or might have. But it's still the same questions, because you don't want to be running in different directions or working against each other. And you need to have a real current reality conversation with the team. And then what's our desired outcome at whatever recursion, at whatever time frame that you need to be thinking at that level.
What about families? A lot of families are going through a hard time now, and I can suppose a situation when they have different vision. So, for instance, one partner wants to move forward, one partner is stuck in the past. And what's your recommendation? How can we straighten our relationship now? Because this different visions bring us a lot of tensions and conflicts.
Yeah, well, as you know, Slava, we're partnering with Crucial Conversations and Crucial Learning, which actually explores how do I have those sensitive and crucial conversations. The strange thing is that the most important conversations most people are not very good at doing. And so, learning the skill about how do I deal with someone who seems to have a different point of view than me. And it's not about making them bad or making them wrong, or I'm being right, or I'm being stronger than you and you need to listen to me as opposed to listen to yourself. There's a whole lot more elegance about, oh, gee, dear, tell me much more, give me more information about what you're feeling and why. And let me tell you what I'm feeling and why. And being able to stop and kind of get out of the emotional conflictive situations that oftentimes those things bring up is quite a mature skill. So, the advice is to have people step back, take a breath, before you react.
Yeah.
And as you know, come on,
I practice it.
you're a
lot.
family guy, Yeah.
Yeah. And let's talk about priorities. Do we have any tool, any approach how to set priorities now? Because we have a lot of um, clear priorities now: family safety, business safety, customer safety. But how can we see our focus to the future now? Maybe find our higher horizons, and how to be sure that this is our high horizons.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough question. I don't know.
When I say I don't know, I just tell people you need to trust the inner voice. And sometimes the best thing to do is to say, okay, here's sort of my fantasy about what I'd like to do, and start leaning into that direction. What you don't want to do is to block yourself from doing anything because you're not clear about the future. Pick the best future you can imagine right now and start moving toward it. As I say, oftentimes I've never achieved a goal I set for myself, but it was the best goal I could set for myself at the time. So I set that for myself and I started moving toward it, but I got a third of the way toward that goal, and then I looked around and I saw something else, and I went, wait a minute, that's even cooler than that goal, or better one, but I couldn't see it from where I started. I had to get moving on the first goal. So that's why the big key is to be engaged. Not engaged necessarily being physically, working harder or whatever, but being engaged psychologically or cognitively in okay, here's where I think we need to go. Let's start moving in that direction. Or if you're dealing with other people, do they have ideas about that same direction? Do they have suggestions about how to engage with it, how to start? So I think the question is, how do I start? And what's the best way to start? And then be willing to course correct when you get better data, because you and I are both going to be older tomorrow, and hopefully wiser.
It will be easier.
So no matter what your decision you make today, there's going to be new data that needs to be incorporated into your thinking tomorrow. And so, as I say, don't get too hung up about goals or vision. Just need to have something that keeps you directed in a sort of a positive way about your life, and then be willing to change it, be willing to upgrade it, be willing to even just get rid of it. If it's suddenly, or if for some reason something better shows up or different shows up that you need to engage with.
And I believe in Ukraine's victory, and all Ukrainians believe that our future will be bright and prosperous. But do you have any recommendation? How can we start to prepare for this future proactively? And do we have any advantages inside Ukraine or outside Ukraine? And do we have any risk which we should consider?
Well, I think you have all of that. You certainly have risks, but resources. Come on, you're an incredibly resourceful country. There have already been almost 4,000 Ukrainians that have been hired in the Netherlands because you're so smart. You're so well educated, and you've dealt with so many things over the centuries in terms of where you're located and how you've engaged with all the invaders and the occupiers and the governments and so forth that you've dealt with. So again, surviving, God bless you. Hopefully you do survive so you can take advantage of all of those advantages that the country does have and the people of that country does have. And you had invited me to Kiev, and I spent some time there, and it's so lovely, and the people were just so gracious and wonderful and smart. So there's no better resource than the people, and I think you've got a head start there. So you have all my best wishes to survive and keep that going.
Thank you, David. And for the last question, and it's not even a question, what can you wish to Ukrainians who are fighting for their freedom now and in every front? And what do you want to say at the end?
I don't know, what comes to mind is just have heart. You know, it really comes from here. You know, and pay attention to that, and you know, as best you can, you know, try to surf on top of the reality that you're dealing with. Not ignore it, but to, you know, see it from a bigger picture, and do the best you can, you know, minute to minute. You know, that's all we can do.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you.